Yeah.
Very, very tired. Okay. Let's begin. Okay. So what's Chesk Sabatim about? Chesk Sabatim is really the core subject of something we spoke about many, many, many times in the past. It's the old version of the title system. How do you know that you actually own property? So we'll say the easiest way to know is to have documents, right? You have a sale document that at least proves that you bought it or received it as a gift from somebody else. Okay, now the problem with that is that if you have a document, then you know they didn't really have floors in their houses. They had mud, and the rats and the mice can come and consume the document. Also, in C, the Gemara says that the Gemara calls this a responsibility to protect your document from the rats. So what's the solution? The solution is what we call cheskas gimel shanim, or cheskas habatim. Cheskas means it means a chazaka, the presumption of the house. How do we know that a house is presumed yours? If you live in it for 3 years. And similarly, if you, not just a house, but any other, piece of real estate, if you live on it for 3 years, it's presumed to be yours. Okay, and that's basically the subject of this parak, and we'll get to it, at greater length. But let's begin. So chesk sabatim, the chazaka of a house, and it's not just a house; it's also baris sichanim aris. If you have pits, these are silo pits or cisterns or caves. V'hashoivches, you have a nest. V'hamerchatzois, a bathhouse. Ubeis habadin, a press. Ubeis hashlochen. Beis hashlochen is a field that is watered. There are 2 types of fields. There's a beis habal and a beis hashlochen. A beis habal does not need to be watered. You plant in it something where the natural rainwater is sufficient to have it grow. A beis hashlochen, on the other hand, must be irrigated. It has to be watered. The ha'avodim and slaves. The kol shu ois peres tader, and anything that produces fruits constantly. Okay, so a beis habal produces fruits once a year, right? It's a yearly harvest, and it's due at a specific point in time where the entire field is harvested at once. A wheat field is harvested. Tomatoes, on the other hand, are not harvested; they're cut. There's multiple cuttings of the plant because it produces constantly. So now, not just does a tomato plant produce constantly, but a house produces constantly. Every day is a new rental. Similar with all of these things. These are not one-time harvests. It's not like planting garlic or potatoes. Potatoes today in Eastern Oregon, they can get multiple harvests in 1 year. But the idea is that the entire field is harvested at once. If they get multiple harvests in 1 year, it's only because they're planting the field multiple times. And Eastern Oregon is hot enough and sunny enough that they can sort of manage that within a pretty tight, the window is not as tight as it would be elsewhere, but it's still pretty tight. Okay, so all these things that are ice and pears tader, they produce constantly. They have cheskos and shalosh shanim miyem liyem. The chazaka, in order to get a presumption that the property is yours, you need to live on the property. Living here means, it doesn't necessarily mean to live. It means using the property in the manner, the way it's supposed to be used. So if it's a house, you live in it. If it's a beis hashlochen, it's a field that you water and you cut constantly. It's a tomato patch. Okay. Stehabal, if you have a field that's harvested once a year, like a wheat field. 1 second. So then it's three harvests, but it's not necessarily day to day. Meaning, in the first scenario, it's the exact same day. So you begin your chazaka in the first of Tammuz, and you end it at the first of Tammuz, whatever, or just prior to the first of Tammuz on the last day of Sivan. Okay. Okay. But if it's a stei habal, it's a field that is not producing constantly, so it's just three harvests. It doesn't have the precise day isn't important. Okay. Rabbi Shmuel says, Gimel Chadashim v'Rishayna, Gimel B'Achrayna, Shnei Masar v'Emtza. Rabbi Shmuel says, if for a stei habal, for a field that doesn't produce constantly, you don't even need three harvests. 3 months followed by a year followed by 3 months is sufficient. It's 18 months in total. Rabbi Kiva says even less than that. It's 12 months in the middle plus a month on either side, a total of 14 months. Rabbi Shmuel explains his opinion. When is this true? In a white field. It's like a wheat field, where everything, the entire field, is harvested at once. But if you have a orchard, so then he holds you can make an express chazaka very fast. How do you do it? Let's say the orchard grew multiple different types of trees. So if you have kanas es tfuasa, he cut down the grain. Umasik azesav, he pressed the olives. The kanas is kaitza, and he gathered together the figs to be dried. That doing that for a year is as if you did it for 3 years, since you used 3 different crops. So let's now go back and let's explain what exactly is going on. Okay, so again, the idea here is you can claim to be the presumed owner of the field without having a document. Now, obviously, even a document only proves that you bought it from the previous guy. It doesn't actually prove the field is yours. Mm-hmm. That's more, title is supposed to do that in a much better way. Okay, now, idea is that if you're living on the field, we'll talk about this in more detail really tomorrow, it's where it comes in, but the idea is if you're living on a property for 3 years and nobody said anything to you, that's a high indication that they actually sold it to you. Because if somebody did say, if somebody was not happy about the fact that you're on the property, then what he should have done was say something. What does he do? He makes a protest. It's called a machal. He gets together two people, and he tells them that he protests, and then the message will eventually get back to you to hold on to your document, because the previous owner is protesting who owns the field. Now, why 3 years? So the idea of 3 years is sort of the minimum amount of time that somebody would not forgive. Up until 3 years, he may forgive. More than 3 years, he won't forgive. I mentioned this a few times. There's a certain rabbi that I'm aware of that was a rabbi in a big yeshiva, a big institution, and he was pushed out for health reasons. His doctor basically told him that if he stays to fight for what he believed was legitimately his, he was going to die of a heart attack. And his doctor basically told him to give up the fight and basically move out of town, which is what he did. He left town and he moved to a different town and he gave up the fight. But he doesn't feel like he gave up the fight, as he feels that it was necessary for his health to give up, but not that he doesn't own the institution. So every 3 years on Erev Pesach, he makes a protest, and he has no court case. He hasn't pursued anything since he left, which must have been at this point probably 15 years ago, maybe even more now. It's probably two decades already. He hasn't filed any lawsuits. He hasn't gone to court, but he makes protests. So he still has a right to it. If his kids want to pursue it, maybe his kids could take it up. So he makes a protest. Okay, so this is how you make sure that the property stays yours. And again, more of the details we'll get to a little bit. We'll start tomorrow. To begin with, today, where does this idea of 3 years come from? What does 3 mean? So obviously today in society, we know three is the charm, right? And this is widely accepted. If you do something 3 times, this like somehow proves it, right? Charles, you'll appreciate this when the FAA wants you to be current and knowing how to fly. They say you have to have 3 takeoff and landings in the past 90 days. 3. Where does the 3 number come from? Maybe it should be 5 or 10. Right. Why 3? So Rabbi Yochanan says, "Shemati meholche Usha." I've heard from the people that went to Usha. Usha was the headquarters, one of the 10 headquarters that the Sanhedrin, the judicial system, was exiled to after the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem. And in Usha was famous for making 10 different decrees that were made in Usha immediately after the destruction of the temple. So Rabbi Yochanan says he heard from some people that were members of the Usha convocation. This would be the judicial system when it was located in Usha. And they said, how do we know that 3 is the charm? Why 3? Where does that come from? Okay, so let's begin. So Gemara says, Mishar Hamud. We know it from a Shar Hamud. What is a Shar Hamud? So you remember from Bava Kama, we have the violent, the habituated ox, right? We had a naive ox. The naive ox, he's an ox that hasn't gored 3 times. The habituated ox, he's engaged in behavior normally considered abnormal, unusual. But now that he's habituated himself, that behavior is now normal, at least for this specific ox. How many times does he have to engage in the behavior to habituate himself? 3 times. Same idea. Once the guy gores 3 times, he's no longer a tam. He's no longer a naive animal. Now he's habituated for whatever type of damage he's habituated. Let's say, for example, he was goring another animal 3 times, and now he's habituated to gore. Let's say it was another unusual form of damage. For example, just to pull one example out of the Gemara says, let's say this animal had a habit of relieving himself on top of vessels, right? And he dirtied them, and he did this 3 times. So the first time, it's considered abnormal behavior. But after 3 times, and again, we're talking here where it appears that the animal's intentionally doing this. After 3 times, it's habituated. We use the word nogach means to gore, because that's the most common example of abnormal behavior, goring. But it could be any other form of abnormal damage. One second. Okay, so once an animal gores 3 times, it leaves its status of naive, it becomes habituated. Similarly here, if you have 3 complete units, each unit is 1 year of time. So then it leaves the domain of the seller and it goes to the domain of the buyer. So the Gemara says, 1 second. So if we're drawing this comparison between the chazaka to the habituation of an ox. So ima sharamur anegicha revius lemechayev hachnami ashana revius lekayim b'rshusay. 1 second. When how is it possible that the animal pays for a muad, pays as if it was habituated? It's only with the 4th act of goring, right? So the Gemara says, if that's the case, you should have to have 4 years of chazaka. Now, what's the problem here? Take a guess. So Gemara says, can't really compare it. Hachi hashta, there's no comparison. Hasam, in the scenario of the habituated ox, right? The truth of the matter is, you become a muad after 3 times. However, the 4th time is just the hechetimtza. It's the possibility of paying for it. The animal's declared a muad. Now you might ask, what difference is it if the animal's a muad? Well, you only figure out the difference if it gored a 4th time. But it's not that the fourth time it turns it into a muad. It's a muad even before that. Ma'ila shalom. What are you supposed to pay? The animal could be a muad, but you don't have to pay anything because it hasn't done any damage. But over here that the person has eaten 3 years worth of benefit. Either 3 years of benefit have been living in the house, or it's been the harvest. Kaima Lobrashut say it's sufficient for it to stay in his domain. Okay, so the Gemara continues with the analogy to a shor hamut. Okay, so this is another interesting point here. I'm not going to go into this at length, but presumably here, when a shor hamut happens, we say the animal becomes a muad. It was naive. Now, not as opposed to the other possibility, which is that it reveals it's a muad. In other words, when the process of becoming a muad, is that something that is revealed after 3 times? Or is it a process that it becomes a muad? Okay. So the Gemara, let's just go with the argument. It's just easier to understand that it becomes a muad after 3 times. After three years, it becomes mine. So Gemara says, if that's the case, okay, let's explain this. So let's say a guy is living on his friend's property for 3 years, and his friend comes after 3 years, after 5 years, and he says, "What are you doing here?" He says, "What do you mean? I have a chazaka. I've been here for 5 years." He says, "I understand you're here for 5 years, but how did you get it? It used to be mine." I don't know. He says, "I don't know. I'm not sure how I got it. I don't know. I'm not sure." So in that case, the entire purpose of chazaka is to extend the legitimacy of my claim over time. But that requires a claim. Meaning, if I say I bought it from you and I lost the document, the chazaka instantiates that. But if I say I'm just here, I've been here for 5 years, but I'm not sure how I got here, then that's not a claim. Chazaka itself doesn't make it yours. But the Gemara asks, well, why doesn't it make it yours? Just like when an animal gores, it becomes a muad, so too chazaka should make it yours, even if you have no legitimate claim of how it became yours. Why do we learn that a chazaka without an argument is not a valid chazaka? So the Gemara explains. So Gemara says, yeah, but no. The idea of chazaka is to instantiate his claim. If he doesn't make the claim, we don't make the claim for him. And obviously, the exception to this would, let's say, be if the guy dies and his children are taking over, then they might not actually know. Then we'll fill in the argument for them. But if the guy himself who's been living there doesn't know how he got it, then a chazaka can't create it to be yours. Chazaka is only an argument to support your explanation of how you got it. So if that's the case, okay, so Ravira again, he's using the analogy, the shor hamud, the habituated ox, and he's extending it. The rule with the habituated ox is that you need to, in order to habituate the ox, you need to speak to the owner of the ox in front of 3 people. I'm sorry, in front of the courts. Meaning, so it wasn't clear. If in order to make an ox move the ox from naive to habituated, you have to give the owner a warning and tell him your ox is beginning to habituate himself in abnormal behavior. He's beginning to normalize that which is not normal, and the owner must be warned 3 times in front. And the warning must be in the presence of the owner. You can't warn the ox without warning the owner. This, by the way, is a debate in Bava Kama, but we're taking for granted the opinion that says the owner must be present. You have to have the owner in front of you, and then you tell him, "Look, your ox is doing this. It's got to stop." You don't have to say that it's got to stop. Okay, you just need to tell him that he's doing the animal. You're gonna have to pay, and and effectively he has to pay for the first few acts. He just gets away with half payments. Limited, of course, by migufai, which is that the maximum payment is the maximum value of the aggressor animal. Okay. So the Gemara says if that's the case, then the machal, this protest, right? I said the story of this Rosh Hashiva that makes a protest. The problem is that this Rosh Hashiva, without giving too much specifics here, is at least 100 miles from his yeshiva every time he makes the protest. Because he makes the protest in one city, and the city where he was formerly, he claims to own his building is at least 100 miles away. So the protest shouldn't be valid. He should have to be present to make the protest. So the Gemara says, "Hasan b'huar be'olov ksiv hacha chavra chavra islay, chavra dechavra chavra islay." Okay. With regard to sharamur, the Torah specifically says if you want to make the animal habituated, then you must warn the owner of the animal. Over here, there's no need to make the warning in front of the owner. Why? Because of this concept. Chavrach, my friend. Chavra islig, he has a friend. The chavrach, and the friend of your friend, chavra islig, is the friend that's friends with my friend. Right? The idea basically is that everybody's friends with each other. And ultimately speaking, if you make a public proclamation that you're making this protest, people will find out, just like I found out about this Rosh Hashiva making a protest. Even though nobody ever told me that, meaning he never told me. There's a rumor, and he creates these rumors by the fact that every 3 years on Erev Pesach he makes the protest. So it's the same idea. So that effectively is in front of the owner. You don't have to. The owner doesn't have to actually be present when because the other guy is basically starting a rumor mill by making the protest. Okay. So Gemara says, okay. So now there's a debate here. I don't really go into too much detail here. So in order for the animal to habituate itself, does the animal have to gore 3 times, or does it also need to take place over 3 days? According to Rameir, it does not need to take place over 3 days. It's just 3 acts. Now, our Mishnah clearly indicates that time is a component of the chazakah, right? Because it's in a field that's watered, it's literally day to day. You have to do it, July 23rd to July 23rd, July 22nd, whatever. Okay. 1 second. So let's say he ate 3 fruits in 1 day. Kigoin te'ena, like a fig. So again, I'm not the fig guy, but apparently the figs could be ready multiple times in the same day. This seems to be unusual. It seems that in most plants, they typically, if it's going to be ripe that day, they'll all ripen at about the same time in the day. With the fig, I guess it ripens more rapidly or something. So you could have 3 different ripenings in the same day. So they have a chazaka. So if you pick each of those figs, that should be a chazaka. Do me the sharamud, ma sharamud, be'idnid islay. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so the Gemara says it's not similar. Why? Do me the sharamud has to be similar to sharamud. Ma sharamud, be'idnid islay hanagicha less hanagicha. Hachanam islahai pero less alahai pero. Okay. By the ox gores an animal, right? Now, at the time that it gored the first animal, it didn't gore the second animal. Time the second animal was gored, it hadn't gored the third animal. The events occurred in chronological order. Over here, you're eating these three figs, but actually the first 2 were on the tree already when the first one was being picked. Maybe they weren't completely ripe, but their presence was there already. And if that's the case, it's not similar, and it won't be a chazak. Now the Gemara is not done with the analogy. The Gemara is trying to pursue a scenario, at least try to get a scenario where you could have 3 units in a very short period of time. So let's see. So Gemara says if that's the case, he ate 3 different fruits on 3 days. Kigoin slaf. Okay, tzlaf I think is caper berries. Is that how to translate it? They say if it's the berries or the flower. Yeah, it's caper berries. It's caper berries. So these berries come out of the flowers and they ripen pretty quickly. Gmara says if you harvest them each on its on 3 separate days, lehev chazaka. Now in this case, they're sort of growing significantly on each of the 3 days. So they're not exactly, neither one is sort of present at the first day. The second 2 aren't really present. The Gemara says not really. Hasan Paramia Isa. Well, the actual fruit is there. It's just ripened. It's just growing very quickly. But the original berry is also there at the first day. So Gemara says another alternative. He eats 3 fruits in 30 days. Aspasta. Aspasta, we said, is a very, very fast-growing animal food. It's so fast that in 30 days you can get 3 crops. You plant it and you harvest very quickly over 30 days. And this harvesting is not, you should use the word harvesting. It's more like cutting. So you cut it and it grows back super quickly. Somebody mentioned, I think Charles mentioned, it might be clover. I don't know, but it's that type of concept. It's a very fast-growing animal food. So that should be a chazaka. So Gemara says, "Hey chidami, what's the scenario? The kadiach v'achla, where he cut down a lot of the growth, after 10 days." So Gemara says that's not a chazaka. That doesn't qualify as eating a crop when you're basically cutting down the tree to get it to grow faster and more. That doesn't count. That's considered one large crop. So the Gemara says, okay, okay, fine. So what he did was he planted the aspasta, he let it grow, which takes 30 days. Then he harvested the whole thing. He planted it again, harvested it again, planted again, and harvested again. 3 times. It took 90 days. This should be a chazaka according to your mayor, because your mayor says that as long as you have 3 events, even if they happen in the same day, the animal, the shor, the ox becomes habituated. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Man holche usha." Who is the author of this member of the usha convocation that made this statement that the chazaka comes from the shor hamud, the habituated ox? It is Rabbi Shmuel. It's Rabbi Shmuel. The Rabbi Shmuel hachanami. According to Rabbi Shmuel, you're correct that according to Rabbi Shmuel, if you eat these three aspasta crops one after another in 90 days, then it would be a chazaka. How do we know this? Because the end of the mission, it's not Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Medvar, Rabbi Sada Halavan. Rabbi Shmuel says that the mission is referring to a white field, Sada Elam, but an orchard. If he harvests the grain, presses the wine, and cuts the figs, you can eat 3 fruits in 1 year, and that's 3 years. Okay. And that's the first step in the Gemara. The first step in the Gemara concludes, how do we know 3 years? From Shor HaMuad. Okay, now we sort of track on to the rabbi's opinion. The Rabbanon Mai. According to the rabbis, what is the source of 3 years? So the source basically is as follows. Yomi stands in the 10th year. Let's say Amr V'Yisrael says, Kroksiv, it's a verse. What does the verse say? Sodes B'Ketzef Yiknu. Jeremiah is giving a recommendation. He says, go buy fields with money because of B'Sefer V'Chasaim and write a document and sign it. Okay, what is how do you see anything there? So he tells him to write a document and sign. How do you see chazak of 3 years? The answer is as follows. Yomi is standing in the 10th year of Tzidkiyahu's reign, right? Mm-hmm. He knows that the 13th year of his reign will be the destruction of the temple, and everybody will be exiled. So he says, look, at this point, you can have the property for this year, year 10 and year 11, but year 10 and year 11, but you won't be able to have the property in year 12 because you'll be going to exile. So what should you do? Write a document and save it so that because you won't have chazaka of 3 years. And he's telling them you'll have 2 years to live on it, not 3 years. So you won't have a chazaka, so therefore write a document. Abai says, not quite. Why? Yomi is giving good advice. How do I know that? Look at the end of the verse. Benu botim, build houses, ushavu, and settle down. He's advising them in Bavel to build houses, because he says to them that they won't be coming back for anytime soon. Meaning, once the Jews are exiled to Bavel, they won't be coming back. So he tells them, build houses, shvu, and settle down, v'notu ginais, and plant gardens, v'achos purim, and eat. Mike Omer, what's he saying? Is this sort of a halachic idea that you're obligated to sit down, to settle down and buy a house and build a house and plant a garden and harvest it? No. He's giving them good advice, meaning what he's telling them is, don't be confused about the prophecy. Don't think that God is just going to let you come back to Jerusalem immediately after he destroys the temple. It's not the case. You'll have to wait 70 years. And therefore, 70 years is a lot of time. Settle down. How do I know? He advises them to take their documents and put it in an earthenware vessel. Why earthenware? Because it lasts a very long time. Now, is there any obligation to take your documents and store them in earthenware vessels? No. Obviously, it's a recommendation. It's good advice that Yomi, Jeremiah, is proffering. So therefore, Abai argues there's no proof here of it, that Yomi is referring to Chazaka. It could be he's just giving them good advice. Because they will be going into exile, they should carry documents with them. Because in 70 years when they come back, those documents will be very helpful to establish who is the rightful owner. Okay, stop here. And tomorrow we're talking more about Chazaka. Okay, great day.